have been cancelled just in the last 48 hours. These include the Ahmedabad-London, the very first flight in this sector after the crash last week, the Delhi-Dubai flight, the Delhi-Paris flight. Yesterday, there was the San Francisco to Mumbai via Kolkata flight that stopped in Kolkata and its left engine. There was a major problem there, and that, of course, led to a lot of delays and confusions for the passengers. More than half of these 10 flights happened to be 787 Dreamliners, the same kind of aircraft that crashed in Ahmedabad last week. So the question is twofold. Yes, it is important to be cautious. It is important that pilots have to be cautious and they have to only ride those planes which are 100% airworthy. Why wasn't similar caution being expressed before the accident that happened last week? Is this in response? Is this in reaction to what happened last week? You heard that audio conversation of a flight from Hong Kong to Delhi, which then had to circle back to Hong Kong, and then the conversation between the pilots and the ATC, the pilot refusing to fly that aircraft, saying it's not 100% airworthy, as should be the case every single time. The question then that needs to be asked is there so much pressure? And some would argue also, certainly some pilots would argue, maybe undue pressure on pilots that even the smallest of faults cannot be overlooked given what happened just 5 days ago. So there is so much pressure on all pilots that they're refusing to now fly aircraft even if there is a 1% error or 1% fault with any of the instrumentation, the electronics, the hydraulics, etc. But first, let's bring you up to speed with these various disruptions that have been caused, and mainly it's happening in Air India because, let's face it, that's the airline which met with the unfortunate accident last week. In the backdrop of the Air India 171 crash, numerous instances of disruptions, cancellations have come to the fore just in the last 48 hours. This morning, the Delhi-Paris flight had to be cancelled because of a technical snag. Subsequently, the flight from Paris to Delhi which was scheduled for tomorrow, that too has been cancelled as a consequence of today's cancellation. So both ways, both sectors, that is the same sector but both ways, the flight has been cancelled. Another one, the Air India Ahmedabad-London flight, which was the first flight in this sector, Ahmedabad-London, after last week's crash. It was renamed or renumbered as AI-159. It was cancelled because of unavailability of aircraft. Air India London-Amritsar flight was also cancelled because of an operational issue. And then yesterday, I referred to this earlier, the San Francisco-Kolkata-Mumbai flight, the passengers were deplaned after it landed in Kolkata after there was a problem with the left engine. Yesterday again, the Air India Hong Kong-Delhi flight returned after taking off from Hong Kong. It circled back and went back into the Hong Kong airport because a technical issue was reported. And you could hear the audio conversation of the pilots with the ATC refusing to fly that aircraft because there was that technical snag. And again yesterday, the Air India Mumbai-Ahmedabad flight was a very short flight, less than an hour. That too was cancelled over an operational issue. Today, the Air India Delhi-Ranchi flight returned shortly after takeoff following another tech issue. Then there was a London to Bengaluru flight, which was cancelled amidst investigations that have been going on into the Dreamliner. These 10 instances that I've just mentioned, over half of them, I think 6 of them, happen to be Dreamliner planes, the 787s, the same make that crashed last week in Ahmedabad. So the question is, the safety of flyers, it continues to remain a big concern, particularly after what we saw last week. 241 out of 242 people who were on board AI-171, they died in that plane crash. The truth of it is yet to come out. We don't know whether it was double engine failure, whether it was pilot error, whether it was electronic or hydraulic failure. That is, of course, a subject of the investigation. On the investigation front, what we know is both the black boxes have been recovered. When I mean both the black boxes, I mean the CVR, which is the cockpit voice recorder, and the flight data recorder, the FDR. But the question is, how much time does it take to decrypt this data? This is now encrypted data which needs to be decrypted. If the black box that is recovered is not in a good physical condition, then it would take anywhere between 2 to 4 weeks. In case it is badly damaged, it could take more than 4 weeks. However, the authorities are required to release a preliminary report. And remember, the investigation is under the Aircraft Accidents Investigation Board, the AAIB. They are mandated to release a preliminary report of what they believe is the cause of this crash within 30 days. So within a month, you're expected to get a preliminary report. The full investigation, the full and final investigation, and the detailed technical analysis sometimes could take up to 2 years. In fact, the last couple of crashes that we saw, the one in 2010 in Mangalore and the one in 2020, it took a number of months for eventually the truth to come out and the full report to come out. I want to talk specifically about both of those previous instances because they're important in the context of what happened to AI 171. In 2010, the Mangalore airport crash involving Air India Express 812, it was a Boeing 737-800. It was a tabletop runway, it skidded off, it fell off the runway and then rammed into the nearby forest. 158 out of 166 lives on board were lost. The plane overshot the runway, it fell into a gorge. It was like a valley right after the perimeter of the airport compound. It fell there. The black box was recovered in parts. The cockpit voice recorder was recovered the next day. The flight data recorder was recovered about 2 days later. This was in the end of May 2010. The analysis, the preliminary analysis, was completed in 5 months, followed by a court of inquiry. That court of inquiry came to the conclusion that it was the pilot who ignored the go-around call and landed late, landed fast. 10 years later, before I get to the second crash that happened in 2020, what was interesting about that 2010 crash, the pilot, the commander of that flight, the captain of that flight, happened to be a Serbian national. He died. His wife challenged the conclusion of the court of inquiry, went all the way up to the Supreme Court. The court ordered that the court of inquiry was wrong and it was not the pilot's fault. In fact, it offered compensation to the pilot's wife. I think it was 4 crore rupees at that time that the pilot's wife was compensated because a wrong conclusion had been arrived at. I'll get to the point that I'm trying to make of this story. The second crash was in 2020, which was in Kozhikode. It was a crash again involving an Air India Express flight 1344. I think it was Dubai to Calicut. Again, a Boeing 737-800. Fortunately, or at least the only silver lining there was the number of lives compared to the number of people on board was a number of lives lost was much less, 21 out of the 190 people who were on board. This plane again overshot the runway. It was heavily raining at that time. The plane itself sort of splintered into 2, bang in the middle of the body of the aircraft. The black box was recovered within 24 hours. The analysis report was released 13 months later, over a year later. Again, it deduced that the pilot chose landing over the go-around. Now, I want to introduce Captain Sam Thomas, who's a former pilot and president of the Airline Pilots Association of India, ALPAB. I'll come to the disruptions in a second, but just going by the history of what happened in the last 2 major crashes, 2020 and 2010, where the inquiry ultimately blamed the pilots, and I know, in the Pilots Association with former pilots in the pilot community, there is an uneasy feeling. Every time there is an air crash, the first instinctive response is to blame the pilot or the co-pilot because they can't defend themselves. In the 2010 case that I just read out to our viewers, the wife of the dead pilot challenged it and the court ruled in her favor.
Hi, Zaka. Now, you've put out some real pertinent points. If you see the 2 crashes, 50% of that was wrongly concluded. So, first of all, there's a lot of misinformation that happens. Let's start off with the first misinformation. I am not a former pilot, as you've been referring to me for the last week. I'm currently serving, and I fly a Gulfstream 200 for a very large chain of hospitals. I used to fly with Jet Airways, so be that as may. As far as the 2 crashes that you've spoken about, we have been asking to involve expertise that pertains to either flying the 737, the civilian side, so that we can accurately come to a decision on what these parameters that you are reading out of the DFDR, the CVR, and the actual ATC transcripts as well are put together. In the case of the second case that you mentioned, the Air Accident Investigation Bureau were looking for investigators post the crash. They were willing to accommodate anybody. Now, this happens. The fact of the matter is that they were looking for somebody in the Air Force who could come and do that investigation. Even in the first case where the 812 crash of Mangalore, some retired Air Vice Marshal was pulled up and he was heading the investigation board. And he even drew the diagram of the airport wrong in the first attempt. So this is what we've been pointing out, that air accident investigation in India needs to be a little bit more on the lines of what it is in the FAA and on the EASA. Now, this is not happening due to lack of expertise in India. You've now called the NTSB here.
Yeah.
NTSB doesn't call you to the US when they have a crash. You've called the UK authorities. We have in-house expertise. We are civilian pilots. We have, from the ALPA India side, we have air crash investigators certified by FALPA. We can call in international experts if you wish. And in the interest of transparency, let's have it on camera so that there's no speculation and you get the exact aspects of what transpired during the entire.
Can I ask you something? The concern has always also been, and bear me out if I'm wrong on this, particularly within the pilot community, that the airline or the manufacturer almost never gets blamed, right? Part of the reason may be, I don't know, again, correct me if I'm wrong, part of the reason may be that to decrypt this black boxes, the CVR and the FDR, much of the time it's taken away from the accident investigation board's remit. It's taken by the same company which manufactured this flight, whose flight has crashed, and therefore they have a I know the phrase vested interest sounds a bit harsh, but it is. There is a vested interest that company has in protecting its own reputation. And they are the ones who decrypt the information as to what exactly happened on board, which led to the crash. Isn't there a conflict there?
Oh, absolutely right. Conflict of interest is what comes out here. And in the interest of fairness, they should not be doing it. Now, coming back to whether these DFDR can be read out in India. As in the way back 90, there used to be an Air Force officer, I forget his name, but he used to run a company called VSM Aerospace. Jet Airways, for whom I worked for 20 years, used to do their routine DFDR readouts with them. So, all of a sudden, now both the manufacturers, Airbus and Boeing, have convinced everybody in India that you can land on the southern side of the moon, you can go to Mars, but you can't sort of milk a DFDR in India. So we will take it to our house and, do it in the best possible manner because we don't think you can do it as well as we can.
No. So my point is it a lack of expertise issue? Is it that these guys are doing this for their own interests? I refuse to believe that, like you said, I mean, if we can send a mission to the moon, surely we can decode a black box.
Absolutely. There's no lack of expertise. It is just that they've convinced you that we can do it better than you and we will do it before you. And maybe they can do it better than us. But like you pointed out, there is a conflict of interest. It is your plane.
Yep.
You don't do what, particularly when your whistleblowers are coming out and saying all kinds of things about you. Your congressional hearing has nailed you. Now, don't you think in the interest of transparency, you should involve everybody? And when that is the reason why we are saying take qualified people from India. Now, on paper, if you take somebody who is in this, I heard of this HIPAA committee. I didn't see a single flyer in this HIPAA committee or an aviation professional in that HIPAA committee. How are they going to question somebody, or how are they going to ensure that when they question somebody, the answers that are being given are accurate?
Okay, let's see how this plays out, Captain. I hope, and like I said, for the interests of the people who were on board, 241 of them died. We need to get to know what the truth was, without any cover-ups, without any, conflict of interest, without any, corporate vested interests sort of taking precedence, or at least trying to derail this probe. Hopefully, we'll get to know this truth as quickly as possible. Leave it at that. Thank you very much, Captain Sam Thomas there, with his thoughts and perspective into what is going on. And in this regard, in finding out what exactly happened to Flight 171, a meeting was held today in which the DGCA, this is the first meeting that the DGCA has had with Air India officials. It has asked for a few things from Air India. The aviation watchdog has asked for the training data of the two pilots concerned. That's Captain Sabarwal and co-pilot Kunder. We do know already that the deceased Captain Sabarwal had more than 8,000 hours of flying experience. He was also an Air India instructor. His co-pilot was Clive Kunder. He had more than 1,100 hours of flying experience. And then the details of the flight dispatches have also been asked for by the DGCA. This is a certified professional who works alongside the pilots to plan and monitor the flights, ensuring that they're safe, they're efficient. They're essentially the ground pilot. That's what they're called, the ground pilots, while the actual pilots are on board and in the air. They're jointly responsible with the pilot for the operational control of the flight. And finally, the DGCA has also sought for the details of the crew who are on board. Meanwhile, the airline itself has taken some steps to try and help the crew. They've set up what they call a peer group. That is, people who are already working in Air India to try and support the families of those who've lost the cabin crew and the cockpit crew, where their mental health, their anxiety, their concerns, and just how to deal with grief can be helped a little bit better by the people who are involved in this company. Former Air Force personnel and pilots are also part of this group. People who have firsthand had experience of losing loved ones to air crashes are also part of this peer group. Talking about loss and grief, there were heart-wrenching scenes today, enveloped by solemn silence, muffled sobs, teary eyes and emotional embraces, all of it playing out in Powai in Mumbai today as the mottled remains of Captain Sumit Sabarwal returned home. The Air India pilot who lost his life in the crash that happened last week of Flight AI 171 in Ahmedabad, his mottled remains were brought back to his home. His family members, friends, neighbors, colleagues assembled in what was a quiet, solemn and extremely sad reverence in a final goodbye to somebody who wished everyone well and about whom everybody had only nice things to say. In a moment that broke the hearts of many who were present there, Captain Sumit Sabarwal's 88-year-old father, who I believe was also with the Indian Air Force, 88-year-old father who was visibly shattered, performed the prayers, the rituals, standing beside his son's coffin. And hundreds of people, neighbors, friends, colleagues, acquaintances, people who had known Captain Sabarwal, stood there silently in line. Many of them were inconsolable. They were clasping hands, they were wiping tears as they walked past his coffin. After the prayer, the body was taken to the Chakala Electric Crematorium for the final rites. And our thoughts, prayers with the family of not just Captain Sabarwal and his elderly dad. You can see that image there. There is nothing more horrible in this world than a parent losing his or her child. And our thoughts and prayers with Captain Sabarwal's father and the rest of his family. I want to move on now to the other big story that we're tracking. Prime Minister Modi is in Kananaskis in Alberta, Canada for the G7 summit. This is the first time that he will be meeting with newly elected Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney. After the very real and bitter lows in the relationship over the last couple of years, brought on in September of 2023 for the first time by Justin Trudeau, then Prime Minister of Canada, and the rather bizarre and politically motivated allegations that he made that there was an Indian hand in the murder of Hardeep Nijjar, a known Khalistani separatist. The diplomatic relationship between Ottawa and Delhi has really completely tapered off. Either country doesn't have high commissioners in their respective missions. Now the question is, can Mark Carney repair this relationship? Both sides are expected to sign an intelligence sharing agreement, something that India wants to try and ring fence the Khalistan issue from the rest of the other issues that are there in the bilateral relationship. Here's a deep dive, and then we'll go across to our Sanjay Suri. Prime Minister Narendra Modi's participation in the G7 summit in Kananaskis in Canada is more than just a diplomatic engagement. For India, it is a platform to recalibrate a strained relationship, also assert its strategic autonomy, and engage with global powers on its own terms. Most significantly, this marks Modi's first ever meeting at a summit level with newly elected Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney. A moment which many are hoping could signal a thaw in the frozen ties between New Delhi and Ottawa. India-Canada relations reached a historic low under former Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. What was once a very cordial partnership descended into acrimony, primarily driven by a political clash between Trudeau and Mr. Modi. It was political posturing on the part of Trudeau. There were divergent views between India and Canada on what was a crucial national security issue for both countries. The tipping point came in 2023 when Justin Trudeau, in the floor of the Canadian Parliament, made the explosive claim that the Indian government's agents were involved in the killing of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, a pro-Khalistani separatist on Canadian soil. India rejected those allegations outright, calling them absurd and politically motivated. The Indian government maintained that Canada had become a safe haven for separatists, extremists, and individuals who incite violence in Punjab, thousands of miles away.
There are credible reasons to believe that agents of the government of India were involved in the killing of a Canadian on Canadian soil. That is something of the utmost and foundational importance in a country of rule of law, in a world where international rules-based order matters. We have a rigorous and independent justice system and robust processes that will follow their course. And we call upon the government of India to engage with us to move forward on getting to the truth of this matter.
The single event catalyzed a tit-for-tat diplomatic spat between Delhi and Ottawa. There were expulsions of diplomats, the trade talks had stalled, there was a complete breakdown in diplomacy between India and Canada. Trudeau's public posturing and indulgence of the fringe Sikh separatist elements struck a raw nerve here in India. India views the Khalistan movement not just as a security threat, but an attack on India's sovereignty. In comes Mark Carney, who is the former Bank of England and Bank of Canada governor, now turned Canadian Prime Minister. He represents a stark contrast from Trudeau in both style and substance. His technocratic, centrist approach to governance may potentially open the door to a quieter but more constructive bilateral relationship with India. Both countries are keen to explore whether this summit can be the launching pad for a reset in ties. According to a recent Bloomberg report, India and Canada are on the verge of signing a new intelligence sharing agreement. That's a significant move which reflects mutual recognition of the need to address long-standing irritants in the relationship. That report said, and I quote, Indian officials are hopeful that this pact will lead to more serious action by Ottawa against separatist elements that are operating from Canadian soil. This would be a vital first step in rebuilding trust and bridging the gap that widened in the previous tenure. India has long argued that freedom of expression cannot be used or cannot be extended to the point of condoning or abetting violence against a foreign state. New Delhi is hoping that under Mark Carney, Canada will adopt a firmer stance when it comes to Khalistani networks, particularly those who are known to be engaged in online radicalization and mobilization of the diaspora for a separatist cause. Carney, for his part, has made the right noises. He has said that he wants to build better ties with India.
What is your message then to Canadians who are a bit disturbed or wondering why Mr. Modi is being invited to Canada when there is this legal process that has not cleared him and his governments of involvement in the death of a Canadian on Canadian soil?
My message is that we're a country of the rule of law. The rule of law is proceeding as it should in Canada, and I am not going to disrupt that process.
Even though India is not a G7 member, India's presence as an invited partner reflects its growing weight in global affairs. At the summit, Modi is expected to pitch India as the voice of the global South, particularly in areas like climate financing, digital infrastructure, and sustainable development. The summit will also highlight energy security and particularly focus on reducing rare earth dependencies on certain geographies, i.e., China. Modi will also likely emphasize India's role as a responsible democracy that is committed to multilateralism and a rules-based order. That's a stand that will resonate well with the G7's priorities. Now, I want to go straight across to our Sanjay Suri, who's joining us from Kananaskis, which is in Alberta, Canada, at the G7 venue. First things first, so when is the meeting between Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Carney? It will be the first time that they'll meet. And what are you hearing is on the agenda of that meeting?
Well, the scheduling, Zaka, is rather interesting. That meeting has been scheduled at 16:40 local time, and that should be about 10 past 4 a.m. tomorrow morning IST. And that meeting, that bilateral between Carney and Modi, will come straight after a press conference that Carney is due to address on this G7. So that immediately means a couple of things. One, that Carney will not necessarily have to face a barrage of questions at the press conference on what transpired through a meeting with Modi, which of course is only to follow. The second, we may not know immediately after the bilateral what transpired, and that will have to depend upon briefings or readouts to follow from either or both sides after some time. There will be some time before some sort of a time lag before the two can brief people on what transpired. And of course, we have to see what the briefings will be from one side and from the other. So the agenda clearly is primarily the economic issue, the economic promises really between the two countries. There has been a degree of trade between the two that really needs to be revived. There have been all sorts of areas of harmony and cooperation traditionally between India and Canada that have been disrupted by the processes that you have just described. So the attempt will be to revive that. And in order to do that, really to find a way to get past the issue, the obstacle issue that has come up, and that will be taken head on by the two leaders. They're due to meet for about 35 minutes. It will be a meeting towards the end of the day, not the last meeting of the day. There'll be meetings to follow with South Korea and Mexico, but that sort of will round off the G7 here.
And very quickly, you know, in terms of obviously the biggest niggle, or not even niggle, it's the biggest concern, the biggest issue between India and Canada is, of course, what India thinks is the open support that certain elements, certain political quarters have given to these separatist elements there in Canada. Clearly, Mr. Carney wants to sort of ring fence that issue from what he believes are the other more important issues, which is trade, one of which you outlined. How are both sides trying to ring fence this, keep the Khalistan issue separate from the rest of the relationship? And also, if you could shed some light on this Bloomberg story that we referred to in our earlier package as well, about an intel sharing agreement between India and Canada. What are you hearing on that?
Well, on the Bloomberg report, clearly the fundamental point of that report is that the Canadians are beginning to take on board India's concerns. And the first obstacle from the India side was that the Trudeau government wasn't listening. And this is now changed, and certainly with Carney as Prime Minister, the Canadian government is taking on board those concerns. And those concerns are not about just a number of people who have a view to express, and surely in a democracy they should be free to express that view. We've seen for a long time that this is not just an expression of views. We saw what happened with Kanishka, and that was an air crash that was clearly the result of terrorism from these groups and based here in Canada. And since then, threats have continued. Threats continue that people should not fly Air India. It's a very sinister threat considering what happened earlier. This is now a matter of grave concern to India. There are continuing instances of violence, vandalism, threats, and there is a Canadian law in place that ought to deter this, and if not deter, to take action. There's the law against hate speech. So when someone says that all Hindus should leave Canada, this is certainly something that's covered by the hate speech law, that law was never invoked. So the concern India has is that Canada is not invoking and enforcing its own laws. And there are signs now that the Canadian government under Carney is beginning to take those concerns on board. So if that happens on this side, India may yield to some of the Canadian demands on the other.
All right.
We'll have to see exactly what it is that Canada is demanding over the Niger issue and the accusations made earlier. That is something to surface. We've had allegations from the Canadian government that have not been substantiated, no evidence. We have a case proceeding in court. Nothing has surfaced there by way of evidence against the Indian government. So clearly, we are waiting to see more here, and the leaders certainly will attempt to negotiate that very difficult space.
All right, Sanjay Suri, live for us from Kananaskis in Alberta, Canada. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll keep an eye out on that meeting between Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Carney of Canada. Meanwhile, the Supreme Court today issued a notice in the case concerning the ban on the release of Tamil superstar Mr. Kamal Hassan's latest film called Thug Life in Karnataka. Remember, there was this huge controversy between Mr. Kamal Hassan and the Karnataka Film Chamber. The court today came down pretty heavily, criticizing the groups that have threatened to boycott or stall or impede the release of the film over some of the controversial remarks that were made by Kamal Hassan, which they believe sort of denigrated the language Kannada. Now, the court said that the rule of law cannot be held hostage to mob threats. It warned that groups of hooligans cannot be allowed to decide what gets to be screened in theatres and what cannot be screened in theatres. It also added that the people of Karnataka are free to disagree with Kamal Hassan, his point of view, his opinion, whatever his views are on which language predates which language came from which. The comments that he made were that Kannada was born out of Tamil, which historically is not correct, it's inaccurate. But the court said fundamental rights must be protected, that Kamal Hassan has a fundamental right to express what he feels, even if some people find those comments offensive. The Supreme Court transferred the plea that was filed by the film's producer from the Karnataka High Court to itself, so it's going to be the Supreme Court that will hear this matter further. It also asked the state government to file its reply in response to the petition that's been filed by Kamal Hassan's lawyers. It questioned the role of the High Court too, particularly over suggestions that the actor had to apologize to resolve this issue, asking who is the High Court to ask anyone to say sorry or otherwise. And related to this and talking about all of these language wars and language debates, particularly those that are emanating in the south, today Tamil Nadu Chief Minister M.K. Stalin once again pressed for the use of Tamil as an official language in the top courts of India. Right now, most courts of law, higher courts of law, use English or they use Hindi, particularly in northern India. The language of the court is Hindi. But regional languages are used very, very rarely and sparingly in courts. Stalin urged that Tamil be permitted for legal arguments both in the Supreme Court as well as in the Madras High Court, a demand that has been long championed by the DMK, including a formal resolution that was passed when Mr. Karunanidhi was Chief Minister many years ago. Now, according to the central government, as of September 27th, 2024, which is just last year, over 2,500 Supreme Court judgments and nearly 900 Madras High Court judgments have been translated into Tamil. However, the language is still not permitted as a language for argument in these courts. The language for argument, predominantly, like I said, is either English or Hindi. I want to now shift focus to the other big story. The war between Israel and Iran has now entered its fifth day, and it only seems to be escalating. More than 200 people have been killed in Iran, and about 24 are dead in Israel, as both sides are exchanging a barrage of rockets and missiles. That image that you're seeing on your screen was from last night, where the Iranian television, the news anchor was reading, and there was a bomb that fell right next to the studio. There are two central themes that are now fast emerging in this war. It's becoming like a war of attrition, but certainly Israel seems to be having the military upper hand, the military dominance, no doubt about it. Certainly in the air, where it seems like almost all the air radars of Iran have been neutralized and that Israel has got air dominance over Iranian skies. But two larger themes are emerging. Number one, will the United States of America be forced to join this war? Remember, Trump was in Canada, in Alberta, for the G7. He was forced to cut short his trip. He had to fly back overnight, and is back in Washington now. There will be a meeting of the National Security Council. He's in the Situation Room taking stock of what he said, something much bigger is likely to come in the Israel-Iran war. And this is against Trump's political instincts. Trump has always painted himself as a peacemaker president. Whether it's Russia-Ukraine, whether it's Israel-Hamas in Gaza, or now between Israel and Iran, he wants peace, but he also wants to ensure that Iran does not get a nuclear weapon. The second big theme that is emerging, and there's a lot of chatter around this, is will Israel eliminate Iran's longtime supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei? But first, the US President Donald Trump, like I said, had to cut short his trip to the G7 in Canada. He left the G7 early. He directed his team to convene a meeting of the National Security Council. Iranian officials, whether or not American and Iranian officials will meet sometime this week, Trump has said that he did not leave the G7 to try and work on a ceasefire. He said something much bigger is in the works. Yesterday, Trump warned Iranians to evacuate Tehran immediately, underscoring the danger to the 10 million residents of the capital of Iran. The American role so far has been quite curious. In fact, in a post on Truth Social in the early hours Tuesday, Trump was responding in a way to French President Emmanuel Macron, to whom he responded by saying Macron is publicity seeking and he is wrong. Trump wrote, and I quote, "Macron has no idea why I am now on my way to Washington, but it certainly has nothing to do with a ceasefire. Much bigger than that. Whether purposely or not, Emmanuel always gets it wrong. Stay tuned," unquote.
We're not looking for a ceasefire. I didn't say I was looking for a ceasefire. That was Emmanuel, nice guy, but he doesn't get it right too often. But we're not looking. We're looking for better than a ceasefire. An end, a real end, not a ceasefire. An end.
So, are you going to target the Supreme Leader?
Look, we're doing what we need to do. I'm not going to get into the details.
But U.S. officials tell us that the president flatly rejected a plan, an opportunity that the Israelis had to take out the Supreme Leader. Do you understand his concern? My understanding is his concern is that this would escalate the conflict beyond where it is already.
It's not going to escalate the conflict. It's going to end the conflict.
Now, pay close attention to those words. That's Benjamin Netanyahu when asked a specific question whether the killing or the targeted killing of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei will escalate the conflict. He said it won't escalate the conflict, it will end the conflict. However, will that be as easy as Israel projects it to be? Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has been the longest serving leader anywhere in the Middle East, in any country in the Middle East. He's been in power since 1989. That's 36 years in power. And his rise to power has been rather interesting. He was born in 1939 as Sayyid Ali to the family of an Islamic scholar. In 1962, he joined the original Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, the founder of the Islamic Republic of Iran. He joined that movement as a student follower to oppose the pro-West policies. He dedicated many, many years of his life to student activism, even teaching politically influenced students by delivering lectures in mosques. In 1976, he was exiled for 3 years, but he returned before the Islamic Revolution that happened in 1979. And then, of course, in 1981, he became the president of Iran after Muhammad Ali Rajai was assassinated. In 1985, he was re-elected as Iran's presidential office. And in 1989, Ayatollah Khomeini dismissed Ayatollah Monzari as his political successor, giving the position instead to Ayatollah Khamenei. In the 2000s, he strongly supported Iran's nuclear program. In fact, Iran and Iraq went to war as well. And he is the one who came up with the whole death to America and forever war sort of constructs that are now almost foundational to the Iranian regime. As the Israel-Iran tensions continue to simmer, the question remains, will the United States get involved? Now, here are a couple of reasons why it may potentially get involved, much against Trump's political instincts. A, to protect Israel's security, to deter Iran escalating this. Remember, this entire thing was started by Israel as a preemptive strike to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, which they believe, and their intel seems to suggest, Iran was just days away from getting to weapons-grade uranium. So the number one reason, of course, is to try and prevent a nuclear escalation. There are lots of US military bases, assets, 40,000 US troops who are present in that region. They need to be safeguarded. Also, very critical allies that the US has in the Gulf: Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, Oman. These are all United States allies. And of course, not to mention Israel, which is the oldest and most steadfast ally of the US in the Middle East. The reasons why Trump may not intervene. Number one, the Trump cabinet is less hawkish compared to, even Joe Biden's cabinet, or even you go all the way back to the Bush cabinet in the early 2000s. China and Russia could back Iran, and that is a big factor to consider for Donald Trump, whether or not to go in. There's been a lot of backlash to American involvement in multiple wars in the last 20-25 years, first in Afghanistan, then in Iraq. That didn't end well politically for any of those presidents. There are also congressional limits on action. Constitutionally speaking, the President of the United States has to take congressional approval before he authorizes American personnel to be sent to war. There is a risk of wider regional conflict. If America gets dragged in to an Israel-Iran conflict, who's to say it's going to stop there? Like I said, China and Russia could back Iran, and this could become a prolonged war of attrition. The public, the United States public, and here's where it gets even more curious for Trump, his MAGA base, the Make America Great Again base, itself is divided to getting involved in such costly wars. Numerous Trump acolytes and Trump supporters like Tucker Carlson, Steve Bannon, Marjorie Taylor Greene, they've all publicly opposed America entering this war. All right, many questions. Trump cutting short his visit from the G7, flying back overnight to Washington, D.C. There's a National Security Council meeting as well. The Situation Room has been readied. Let's try and go across to Julia Benbrook, CNN White House correspondent, who's now joining us. So Trump cutting short his trip to the G7 in Canada, flying back overnight, even commenting on social media that something big is about to happen. Do we know what?
Well, President Donald Trump is back at the White House this morning. He arrived here just a couple of hours ago after deciding to leave the G7 summit in Canada early. Now, he was slated to stay there until later this evening, but he told reporters that as that ongoing conflict between Israel and Iran continues to escalate, that he needed to get back to Washington as soon as he could. The White House confirmed his early departure, saying that he was leaving early, quote, because of what's going on in the Middle East. Now, on Air Force One, Trump told reporters that he is looking to bring a real end to the conflict, arguing that that would be better than a ceasefire agreement, while also suggesting that giving up on negotiating entirely could also be an option. Now, Trump has said that he believes that the next 48 hours will be very telling on if Israel ramps up or tones down its attacks. Now, it's important to note that even at the G7, there was a little bit of pushback between leaders, as Trump originally suggested that he would not sign on to a joint statement calling for the de-escalation of hostilities between Israel and Iran. But those G7 leaders did put out a statement calling for a resolution that appeared to have Trump's support. In fact, an official familiar with the matter said that that statement did have his blessing.
The big question, Julia, is will the United States get involved in this war between Israel and Iran? And how does this sit politically with President Trump, who's always positioned himself as a peacemaker president?
That is the big question, and it still remains to be seen if the U.S. will become more involved in any way in this conflict. We do know that Trump has called on his national security team to convene in the Situation Room today. This came after he posted on his social media site, Truth Social, calling for the millions of people in Tehran to evacuate immediately, and it's still unclear what led him to issue that type of a warning. I was here at the White House yesterday as well, and a member of our team saw some national security advisors, officials arriving here, potentially for some types of meetings while Trump was still at the G7 as well.
Is there any further information of any possible meeting between American and Iranian officials later this week? There was one that was supposed to happen on Sunday, but that got cancelled because of this ongoing conflict.
We're still closely monitoring any sort of advancement when it comes to this potential meeting, but we have heard from the president himself now, again, posting on his social media site saying that he has not reached out to Iran in any way, shape, or form, and that any reports that have said so were, quote, fabricated. Now, this came after a person familiar with the matter said that Trump had directed members of his team to attempt a meeting with Iranian officials as soon as possible.
All right, Julia Benbrook reporting from the White House tonight for us. Thank you very much for joining us from Washington, D.C. I want to go across to Mr. Ori Goldberg. He's an Israeli academic who's now joining us, a political commentator. I just want to ask you, when Netanyahu was asked why if Israel were to kill the supreme Iranian leader, why the situation wouldn't escalate, and he said it won't escalate, it will end. Today, Israel Katz, who's the defense minister, said that Ayatollah could meet the same fate as Saddam Hussein. Why does Israel want to kill the longest ruler in the Middle East? Forget about the longest ruler in Iran.
Israel doesn't know what it wants. Both the prime minister and the minister of defense are closer to mafia dons than they are to leaders of a country. Netanyahu obviously would not address details, and the minister of defense has been parroting Netanyahu for many long weeks, ever since he became minister. Israel, what it does best, its classic modus operandi in conflicts like these is assassinations. It did that in Lebanon with Hassan Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah. It did that in Gaza, and still doing that in Gaza. Israeli media constantly presents fallen Hamas, quote-unquote, senior leaders. Israel killed 5 regimental commanders of the same district in Hamas over a period of 2 weeks. That is Israel's only measure of success. Israel has not been able to hit Iran's nuclear program significantly. And obviously, when Israel thinks about regime change, it thinks about killing the man who is in charge right now. Once again, this is a demonstration of the perennially tactical mindset that Israel employs, even in such conflicts that may appear apocalyptic and all-engrossing. The Israeli mind is very tactical, very much mission-oriented. Killing the supreme leader of Iran would spell success in an Israeli book.
But
would
Mr. Goldberg,
really mean success?
There is
I don't know.
If I may, there is a qualitative difference between killing Hassan Nasrallah and Yahya Sinwar and killing an Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. He's the sovereign head of a state. The consequences will also be extremely different.
Will they? Israel doesn't seem to think so. Israel violated Iranian sovereignty without so much as the blink of an eye. There's absolutely nothing preemptive about the Israeli strike that I think is in broad consensus, both among legal scholars and among political pundits. The Israeli strike was premeditated. It had been planned for a very long time. It was carried out at the time chosen because of political reasons, mostly domestic. So Israel has absolutely no compunctions and no constraints when it violates the sovereignty of another country. Israel did this in Lebanon. It's still doing this in Lebanon. It did this in Syria. There's no reason to assume it can't do so in Iran. And in fact, the Israeli security strategy seems to be ensuring total impunity for Israel, regardless of the scope or severity of its actions.
But would it also be, and I'm sorry I'm interrupting, would it also be, just to take off from what the Prime Minister said in the interview yesterday to one of the American networks, that this is a regime, a ruler who for the last 40 years has been terrorizing Israel, on whose watch Iran has pledged death to America and death to Israel and the forever war. So he believes that Iran and its regime is probably at its weakest in the last 40 years. And he's going for the kill.
Be that as it may, that still doesn't make Israel conform to international law as it does this. And again, with all due respect to Prime Minister Netanyahu, his adamant attempts to claim that this was a preventive strike, even he himself rebuffed them by saying that Iran might have the potential to build nuclear bombs, that Iran has been talking about, that Iranians have intentions. Preventive strikes require an element of urgency. Preventive strikes are legitimate in international law. If one's enemy is threatening to imminently do real damage to oneself, to attack, to kill, whatever. Iran was doing nothing of this sort. Iran does not possess nuclear weapons. Israel, according again to a broad variety of reports, possesses dozens, if not hundreds, of nuclear devices deliverable on a broad variety of platforms.
But none
So
of it declared, none of it openly declared. But anyway,
that's very true. But who's been terrorizing who? Israel and Iran have been waging a coldish war for more than 15 years now. For the prime minister to come and stand and to appear innocent and say, well, it's our God-given right, it is very far from being a God-given right.
All right, we'll leave it at that, Mr. Goldberg. Thank you very much for joining us with your thoughts and perspective. We will keep an eye out on how this plays out. The million-dollar question, of course, is, at least from an American point of view, will the United States be forced to enter this war? Retired Brigadier General Steve Anderson shows what are the military assets that the United States has in this region, what is it that Israel and Iran have available in the Middle East, and why there is a particular weapon, it's called the bunker buster bomb, which is critical to whether or not America will have to enter this war.
Retired U.S. Army Brigadier General Steve Anderson is at the Magic Wall to break down the military implications. General, what assets does the United States have in the Middle East right now?
Well, thank you, Laura. It's great to be here with you. Right now, we've got a couple of carrier battle groups that are inbound to the Mediterranean. We've got the Nimitz, and then we've got the Carl Vinson that's on site as well. There are 2 destroyers, my understanding, within range to be able to support Israel right now. Of course, we also got 46,000 troops scattered on 9 different installations all over the Middle East. The Al Udeid Air Base is probably the most significant. There's quite a number of F-16s, F-35s that can fly out of there. And there's also aerial refuel. We've been talking about using B-2 bombers out of Diego Garcia to perhaps deliver this GBU-57. It's probably so far away, 3,500 miles, that it would need some aerial refueling assets. So we've got those assets available in the theater. We've got everything I think the Israelis will get lots of support if President Trump wants to provide it from these carrier battle groups and the assets that are already in the area.
Well, you have the assets, and let's talk capability here, because one of Iran's nuclear sites is buried deep underground in a mountainside. The U.S. does have the capacity of reaching it with bunker busters. Describe how that would work.
Well, this is probably the most capable conventional munition in the world, the GBU-57. It can penetrate up to 200 feet of hardened facilities. The problem in Fordo is that some of the facilities, I understand, and some of the centrifuges may be as deep as 300 feet. But nevertheless, this is a massive bomb. It delivers about 5,000 pounds of explosives, a 30,000 pound, and there's only one asset really in the world, the B-2 bomber, that can deliver this. And as I mentioned, it's about 3,500 miles away. But this is an incredible munition. I had them in Afghanistan. We used it a couple of times. It's very, very effective. But the question is, can it penetrate deep enough to really get at all the centrifuges? I submit that we would probably have to have at least a half dozen of these things that we'd have to put on site at Fordo to really have the effect that we want.
Well, meanwhile, Israel is saying that it's flying unimpeded over the skies of Iran, that Iran's military has been degraded by the strikes. We know about the U.S. capabilities. What are the capabilities of Israel's military and also Iran's now?
Well, I would say Israel's got the upper hand, without a doubt. They've got total air superiority over Tehran right now, over all of Iran. They've demonstrated that. They've also have intelligence dominance, which is absolutely critical in this fight. So, I mean, there's no way that the Iranian military can match the Israeli military. In fact, they do have some assets, some F-14s, MiG-29s and whatnot, but the only thing they're really able to use right now is the Shahab-3 and the guided missiles. They've got perhaps 2,000 or so guided munitions, ballistic missiles that they could fire at Israel, but a lot of the launching sites have been taken out by the Israelis, again, due to their air superiority. So it's really not a fair fight at this point. Israel's got the upper hand, and they are seeking to take advantage of that.
Do they actually need the United States' help then?
They do if they want to take out Fordo. If they want to have, because the United States is the only country in the world that can provide that deep penetrating GBU-57 capability. And the B-2 bomber that can deliver that capability. So yes, they would need the United States to do that. If they didn't have the United States, The only other way they could do that, they'd have to do some kind of a ground attack, believe it or not. I mean, some kind of a special operations where they'd have to secure the area and send guys with bombs into these tunnels to blow everything up in there. That can be done. I would not underestimate the Israelis and their capability to do that. Now, of course, invading another country, putting boots on the ground in Iran would be a major escalation in the war and would probably outrage the entire Arab community. But they could potentially do that.
Finally, enhance your technical analysis with ready-made chart patterns, feature of Money Control Super Pro. Monitor chart patterns as they develop live in the markets and be the first to seize opportunities. Get your investment superpower today. Subscribe now to Money Control Super Pro.
Co-presented by... This is News 18 Network. India's largest news network.
Let's talk about India as it has begun relocating students from Tehran's medical universities to safer zones amid the escalating Iran-Israel conflict. The Indian embassy, in close coordination with Iranian authorities, is facilitating this on-ground movement now. Many have been advised to leave the capital using private transport. Separately, some Indian nationals have exited via Armenia. The MEA has said that the situation remains fluid and further advisories may follow. Over 1,500 students are to be evacuated and the first batch is already en route via the Armenia corridor.
How has the experience been? Because it's very traumatizing to see that your children are there and then there are a lot of difficult times for you. How has it been like for a couple of days? How was it for you personally as a parent, as a father of two kids?
I never experienced such a... It was really trauma for me as well as for my children, but my children were they're very brave. Yeah. They really don't want to put us under any stress. It's not them only, all the children over there. But from the third night, when the strikes grew more, intensity of the strikes was more, that was really, my daughter told, tonight it will be difficult for us. And I was talking to her on video and she told me that something has stuck and I had heard a big explosion and she started running downstairs. Running downstairs means to the ground floor, not any bunker, not any shelter, nothing. They were just standing in some corner or something like that. That was really painful.
There's a bit of helplessness on your
helplessness. That was very painful. That really was very painful.
So because now the government has started a process of at least moving them to a safer place, are you satisfied with the response that the government has given?
Definitely, we are satisfied. We all, not me only, all the parents, majority of the parents have said, really, now they are relieved, little bit relieved. Little bit, partially relieved, and they have been lodged in some hotels. They have been given buffet, breakfast and dinner. They will be served with dinner and lunch too.
And we're getting more updates on Indian students being evacuated from that Armenia route from Iranian universities. Remember, many of the medical students who are studying in Iran, in Iranian medical universities, also belong to the state of the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir. And that's why the conversation that my colleague Ishan was having with one of the parents there, they are worried for the safe arrival of their kids, of their wards, and now we are putting out these latest visuals of the Indian students who are being taken out of Iran through the Armenia route. My colleague Siddhant is with us on the broadcast. Siddhant, here we have already spoken about how the Indian Ministry of External Affairs has in fact made arrangements so that about 1,500 of these students can be evacuated safely through this particular Armenia route. But what is the exact number of Indian students who are studying in Iran?
Well, Greha, we don't have the exact numbers, but but the figure that is available in public domain, then it is somewhere between 1,500 to 2,000 Indian students studying in various universities across Iran. And in fact, most of them were taken to safer places by the Indian embassy day before yesterday. In fact, yesterday also, some were taken to the safer places to Guam and other parts out of Tehran. And now we're getting to know, in fact, the ministry has confirmed the footages and videos are also available that one batch of Indian students have successfully managed to reach Armenia via road route. And in fact, these are 100 students in the first batch, 110 students. Ministry of External Affairs has confirmed this officially. There is a control room which has been set up at Ministry of External Affairs' headquarters.
Viewers, I'm not trying to blow our own trumpet here, but CNN News 18